such good advice, man. Like, you kind of have to be crazy to do this. And I am, like, this is all I ever wanted to do.
Right.
But if you have that doubt in you where you're like, maybe this just, and I'm not talking about like the imposter syndrome and all the stuff that we all deal with. But I mean, like, if you just have this overwhelming sense of like, maybe I'd prefer doing something else, not like, can I do this? But I'd rather, maybe I'd rather be a chef or like be a firefighter, whatever. Then his advice is like, just chase that. Because this is really like, it's all or nothing. And you're probably going to, at some point, ruin all of your relationships over it. And, I loved it. I was like, that's so awesome. So,
oh my God, it's so blunt.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like I guess it's a bit of a mind fuck, right? Like, you're like, oh, how in this am I?
Yeah, totally.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, you may have heard me mention before that I recently started a Discord server for the podcast. If you want to join the conversation over there, you can find a link in the show notes or on the homepage of this podcast at secretsonics.co. In the coming days, I'm going to be sharing a sample pack there with some of my own personal samples that I use all the time in my productions. This pack will only ever be shared on the Secret Sonics Discord server, so I hope to see you there soon. All right, back to the episode. So let's dive back into kind of your process. I know you're kind of like the de facto engineer of the studio. What does it look like when artists contact you? What's the first thing you do when a band reaches out?
Yeah, so I always try to get them to actually, and I know this has been a challenge with the pandemic, but I try to get them to come into the studio like as fast as possible, just because I feel like, if someone calls and says like, hey, what are your rates? Like, we're never, if that's like their first, like, not even like, hey, how are you? Like, I found out about you guys and I want to ask some questions about blah, blah, blah. They're just like, hey, how much are you? Like, we're going to lose that. Like, we're never going to win that. It's always going to be too much. And just because if that's like the first priority from,
Yeah, it's like an instant red flag, right?
It kind of is. Yeah. I mean, if it's like a question that comes up in the second or third question, then that's sort of more what I'm talking about. I'll just say, what we should do is let's schedule a meeting to have you come down. And part of my doing so is not in any way to be like manipulative or like hide what the costs are, because I'm fully open with all of those things. But it's just to like get a chance for the artist to come in and actually communicate what they're trying to do. Because a lot of times you can't really gather all of the information in a phone call. Like, you don't really know who you're talking to. It could be a singer-songwriter who's and maybe they're not communicating it super well. Like, it could be the singer of a band who's calling on behalf of the band, and you don't know that. You think you're just working with this one guy. Or so in any event, I ask them to come down, and then I'll ask if they can play something that they've either have you recorded before. Is this your first time? Like, where are you at? And either way, I'll ask them to play something, whether it's off their phone or if they have like a demo or even a proper recording of their last record or just anything, and play it in the control room over our monitors so we can listen to it kind of like loud and get excited about it and be like, cool. Like, I totally get like where you guys are going with this. And then just sort of talk about like maybe where they want to go with the next record or the next song, if they're looking to do the same thing and stay in the same vibe, or if they're looking to double down on something that worked about the last thing they did, or whatever that is. Just like have like a good 20 or 30 minute conversation, and then figure out how we can make that make sense. Like, is it a song you're looking to do? Is it an EP? Is it a record? How flexible are you guys with time? Are you looking to come in and just like spend 3 weeks booked out? Or can we do this where we do basic tracking for 2 or 3 days and then just spread it out over the next like couple of months around other things in the studio? And then based on that, I'm able to sort of come up with like a quote on how much I think it's going to cost to do it, and maybe like the time frame. And that's usually my upfront sort of process of like how I, get a band to come in.
Yeah, that's crazy. Does the studio usually book out like weeks on end with one artist, or is it usually like a hodgepodge? I find that like I'm almost jealous of the guys that are, guys and gals that are able to, book out weeks at a time.
Oh man, I'm so
and just do that.
I know.
I'm all over the place.
Me too. Like there are moments where I've had the opportunity to work on a single record for a month, and there's nothing like it, because you feel like you're just, what you're doing every day. Like, you wake up with like a goal in mind, and it's otherwise like, we're talking about, you essentially are like flipping back and forth between multiple. This project needs editing. This one needs a vocal still. This one's almost ready to be mixed. But like, there's just so many hats that you're wearing that it's fun, but it can often get a little bit distracting and frustrating because you want to keep everyone happy, and you're just constantly juggling.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of stuff gets procrastinated also in this.
Oh yeah,
in this world,
right? Especially the editing. I mean, I'll find sometimes that like I've waited, and now like 6 projects I'm working on all need editing before anything can be mixed. And I'm just like, oh God, here we go. You know?
Yeah. I want to start doling that out to other people and
Man.
and delegating it, because even if it's not necessarily worth the money, it's worth the time save. It's almost like my what's the analogy I'm thinking of? It's like, you know, if I have a river, now all of a sudden there's like a dam because of all the editing I have to do, and so I'm not able to do as much work.
Totally.
You know, it's just like this. It's just this point that needs to be removed in order to complete more projects. So it's almost worth the money to kind of dole it out to somebody else to do some of those edits, you know?
Absolutely.
But it's hard but that's hard to delegate sometimes, because like, you know, how you recorded the guitar and you had an idea of how you were planning on editing that. And
there's that. I will say that, like, I've given up control on a couple of things that I just don't necessarily enjoy doing. Like, if I'm working, you know, on a project where maybe the drummer like needs a lot of help in the way of like beat detective and all that kind of stuff, I'll put together the comp that I think are the best bits, and I'm happy to sparse that work out and have someone else do it for me, because I just don't enjoy it. Like, and when it comes back in, I'll check it and make sure that it sounds great and that it still feels good and there are no like ticks or pops. But I don't enjoy spending hours doing like minute drum editing. I, for whatever weird reason, enjoy doing that with vocals, but I just don't with drums. And I think it's like, especially in rock music, I feel like a great drummer is so important. You know, it's like kind of everything. Like, that's really, like, people think the singer is the quarterback, but I feel like with rock music, that might still be true, but the drummer is like right underneath your lead singer of importance. So when something just needs like so much work to make it work, and there really is no other option because them coming back and doing another 10 takes isn't going to make it better, then I just comp it and send it out to someone who I know has great ears for that and will do that for me, because I don't enjoy it.
Yeah, I noticed that when I sent out vocals not so long ago for tuning, you know, there were like maybe a couple of mistakes or things I would have tuned a little differently, but it still got it 98% of the way. And then those 2 edits I was just able to make on my own because I knew what to do.
Exactly.
So instead of like 3 hours of editing vocals, I spent, 5 minutes.
Exactly. Yep.
That still cleared the way for me to it plowed the snow.
That's right.
you
man.
know?
It opened the dam up.
Yeah, exactly. So are you into pre-production when you're working with like rock bands, especially? Like, I know that's like often very important, or do you kind of just get them in the studio and start recording and just take it from there?
Yeah, I am a pre-production guy, and I think it's because I feel like the song is the most important thing. I mean, it's everything. Like, the making sure the arrangement and the melody and the lyric is doing what it's supposed to do. And I feel like the arrangement and melody part of things is really what I gravitate towards. Like, I work sometimes with lyricists, and my wife's actually a great lyricist, and I have a handful of others lyricists out there that I work with that are phenomenal at that. But for me, like, if I'm working with a rock band, I'll set up some pre-production sessions, and sometimes it's them just like creating demos however they're able to. Like, these days, a lot of people have the means to, quickly whip together a demo. It doesn't have to be amazing quality, but just enough that I can hear the vocal clearly with whatever the band sort of is doing underneath. And then I'll ask for like a lyric sheet and I'll go over it, and then just sort of make any edits or adjustments. And then sometimes, like, once I have the chance to do that, I'll bring my notes with me into like a rehearsal space with them and just like go through and say, hey, let's just try right here, like shortening this section or doubling this or creating something cool in that moment, or figuring out how to make the chorus like a bigger lift just on a melodic level. I feel like you're there, but maybe it needs to go up an octave instead, or it needs to sort of do something so it doesn't feel like a verse still. Or, I mean, and of course there are times that, you're not hired for that. Even if they say like they want to hire you as a producer, they're still like, well, these are the songs and we want to record them, and pretty much as is, right, and this is our vision. Then sure.
Producer is a term that's like in flux these days, right?
It is, man. Yeah. Like, you're kind of expected to do everything when they want you to, but it's, for me, it depends on how invested you are in it. If you feel like I always feel like I'm like trying to act as like a conduit for the artist's vision, because like they are the ones that have to wear the record at the end of the day. And
yes,
usually,
amen to that.
Yeah, you try to, like, they trust you because you're not trying to like be a superhero that's like wearing a cape that's like, don't worry, I'll fix everything. Like, that's not really your job. Like, you're just trying to make sure you get like the essence of what they're trying to do and make it the coolest that you can. And that's really, and then don't mess it up.
Yeah. Don't screw it up. and don't be a dick.
Yeah,
Those
pretty much, man. I mean, there are moments where you have to be maybe a little bit strong about certain things, but definitely don't be a dick,
Right. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Amazing. In terms of like recording, like I know you have this access to this amazing space. Is that do you find that the space is a big part of the sound that you're able to get, or is it maybe more of a dry space? Are you adding things afterwards? What how much is the recording process a part of your tone?
Yeah, I think that it is an awesome sounding room, and I'd be lying to say that, to say that that's not important, because that our room has sort of become known for getting great drum sounds. And of course, a lot of that is having, the truth is that it's like great drummer, great sounding kit, mic'd really well. You're like 80% the way there. And then all that's really left is like, if you're in a space that sounds really good, that's helpful, of course. It's going to make everything you're capturing sound better. And I have that. So it really depends on the vibe of like what you're going for. And I always say that for me, it's important to try to visualize or hear in your head, like if you close your eyes, like what the song is going to sound like at the end of this. Like, but even before you start hitting record or anything, start even setting a microphone up, like what do you imagine this to sound like? And then just make sure that every decision you make is like pushing you towards that. Otherwise you're just guessing and you're like using things that you've learned and other people's tricks, and none of that matters. Like, it's just, you're trying to push towards like what that idea is.
Yeah, I love that. And that's something I've been talking a lot about on the podcast recently, of just like, having a vision in your mind and then reverse engineering it, or figuring out what tools you need to use in order to get to that vision. It's like, okay, I know what that snare drum has to sound like, and this is why it doesn't sound like that yet. How am I going to get there? Exactly. So do I need to record it at a different angle, or do it, am I just ducking out some frequency or whatever it is?
Yeah. And of course there's like, part of that is experience, and part of it is knowing some basic tricks of like, if your snare sounds dull, maybe you want to boost this frequency, and like the obvious stuff that's good to know just on the engineering part. But I really believe that like the source sound is so much more important than any of that, like, if it's, you have everything set up and he hits the snare and you have it mic'd, and it's mic'd well, and it just doesn't sound in your head how you imagined like the signature snare sound to be for the song, and you have kind of a vision for that, then try something else. Like, you just have to, same with like guitar amps and, and even like the position of the mics. Like, even if you thought, oh man, well, they're like a vintage band, so if I use this old amp, it's going to sound right. If it doesn't sound right, it's not right, so.
Yeah. Make a change.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like a lot of people at the beginning of their journeys, they kind of focus on the mixing side and not on the recording side. And I know I was this way. I was like, okay, let me just quickly record something, and then I'll play around with all the EQs and the compressors and the reverbs and the delays and see what happens. But it's kind of silly, because like I could have gotten a much better sound if I had done the guitar properly and actually mic'd it nicely, or a million and a half other things.
Yeah, the crazy thing is like when I get hired to just mix songs, and you push, you have your template, and you're like, start pulling the faders up on just the drums and then the bass and then the guitars, and you start hearing things. If something was recorded really well, as soon as all the faders are up, like it already sounds great. Like, you should already, in my opinion, like when you're done recording your production, and even if you have like some plugins on or whatever you're doing, you should pretty much like have something that sounds excellent. I'm not really a big fan or believer in the like, night and day, like the band goes after you're done with all your tracking, they like go home and then they come back and they're like, whoa, it sounds so different than what it sounded like yesterday. Like, for me, I'm constantly pushing towards a direction, and the mix is really much more about like cleaning things up and making sure that sonically everything has a place, and that you're like, the whole sonic real estate thing,
Yeah, I think of mixing often as not even the energy, but like the focus.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like the kick is in the right place now. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's other decisions. It's like, I love the kick sound, but is it in the track? Is it giving me enough bottom end? Is it doing this? Is it, those sorts of like later decisions that you can make.
Yeah. Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about your approach to mixing. I know you're in this crazy facility. Are you using outboard gear for mixing, or only for recording? Are you in the box, hybrid? What do things look like?
Yeah. So these days we're not really mixing on the console much, like at all. And the reason for it, again, is because so much of the work we do, even when we have like a bigger project that comes through mixed in with the other ones that we're doing, we need to so quickly be able to like set up for the next session, that it just isn't feasible. And budgets usually don't, they don't allow for the fact that it might take 2, 3, 4 hours to set back up for a session so you can make